The shears bit into Clara Whitmore's scalp like teeth of ice. Each cut stole more than hair. It stole 7 years of marriage, every dream she'd ever held, every shred of dignity she'd fought to keep. Her husband's body wasn't even cold in the ground. 3 days. That's all the mercy they'd given her. Now, his sister Henrietta stood over her scissors, gleaming smile sharper than the blade itself. "You're coming with me," a stranger would say hours later, finding her half frozen in a forgotten shack. But first, she had to survive the longest night of her life. Friends, this is a story of unspeakable cruelty and unexpected salvation in the harsh Wyoming territory of 1877. Stay with me until the very end, and please comment your city below. I'd love to know how far this tale of courage has traveled. Now, let us begin. The first cut was the cruelest. Not because of the pain, though the cold metal against Clara's scalp sent ice through her veins, but because of the sound. That terrible snip echoed across the frozen yard like a gunshot announcing to the world that Clara Abigail Whitmore was no longer a woman worth respecting. "Hold still!" Henrietta Crawford hissed, yanking another fistful of auburn hair. "Unless you want me to take an ear with it." Clara's knees burned against the frozen ground. The snow had soaked through her morning dress within seconds of being thrown down, and now the cold crept up through her bones like poison. She could feel the numbness spreading, but she wasn't sure anymore if it was from the weather or from the horror of what was happening. "Please." The word escaped before she could stop it. "Henrietta, please. William wouldn't want—" "Don't you dare speak my brother's name." Another chunk of hair fell. It landed on the snow in front of Clara's face, the auburn strands stark against the white. She'd spent 7 years growing that hair. William had loved to run his fingers through it in the evenings, back when things were good between them, back before the sickness took him. "You never deserved him." Henrietta continued, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd waited years for this moment. A city orphan with nothing to her name. No family, no breeding, no worth. Behind her sister-in-law, Clara could hear the Crawford brothers shuffling in the cold. 5 of them standing in a half-circle like executioners at a hanging. Marcus, the eldest, with his arms crossed and his face unreadable. The twins, Silas and Solomon, wearing identical sneers. Ezra, whose nervous giggle kept cutting through the winter air. And Josiah, the youngest, who wouldn't meet her eyes. "Marcus." Clara tried to find the eldest brother's gaze. "Marcus, you know this isn't right. William trusted you to. William trusted you." Marcus cut her off, his voice flat as the frozen plains. "And look how that turned out. 3 days after we put him in the ground, and you're already throwing yourself at the neighbor's hired hand." "That's not true." Clara jerked forward, and Henrietta's shears caught her scalp. Hot pain bloomed above her ear, and she felt blood begin to trickle down. "Careful now." Henrietta's laugh was like breaking ice. "Keep struggling, and this gets a whole lot worse. I only spoke to Jacob about the fence line. He offered to repair it after the storm. That's all that happened. I swear on William's grave." "You swear on nothing." Marcus stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "You're nothing. A whore who couldn't even give my brother children. 7 years of marriage and not one baby to show for it. What kind of woman can't do the one thing God made her for?" The words hit harder than any blow. Clara had asked herself that question 1,000 times. Every month when her body failed her. Every time she saw the disappointment in William's eyes, quickly hidden, but never quite fast enough. Every Christmas when Henrietta would parade her own children through the house, making pointed comments about how quiet things must be without little ones running around. "I loved him," Clara whispered. "I stayed with him through the sickness. I held his hand when he—" "You held his hand while you waited for him to die so you could have the ranch. That's a lie." "Solomon." "Or was it—" Silas laughed. "Whole county knows you've been eyeing the Turner spread. Heard you've been real friendly with their hired man. What's his name, Jake something. Jacob Brennan. And I've spoken to him exactly twice. Once when he came to offer condolences, and once about the fence. Twice is all it takes for a woman like you." Clara's fingers dug into the frozen earth. She wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. But she was one woman against 6, and the cold was stealing her strength with every passing second. "William left me the house," she said, trying to find solid ground. "It's in his will. The property is mine." The silence that followed was worse than the insults. Then Marcus smiled, and Clara understood that she'd made a terrible mistake. "About that." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Seems there's some question about the validity of that will. Judge Patterson is an old friend of our daddy's. He's agreed to look into it. Might take a while. Months maybe. Years. And in the meantime, this land belongs to the Crawford family. Always has. Always will." "You can't we?" Henrietta grabbed another handful of hair and cut it close to the scalp. "Almost done here, boys. Just need to clean up the back." Clara felt tears freezing on her cheeks. She'd stopped feeling her fingers minutes ago. The blood from her cut had started to freeze against her temple, a dark crust forming in the bitter cold. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "If you want me gone, I'll go. Just let me gather my things and your things." Ezra's giggle cut through the air. "What things? Everything in that house belongs to us now. My clothes, my mother's Bible, the photograph from my wedding, Crawford property, all of it." Clara's heart cracked. The Bible was the only thing she had from her mother. She'd carried it through the orphanage, through the long journey west, through every hard day of her marriage. The thought of Henrietta touching it, of those cruel hands on those worn pages. "Please," she said again, though she knew it was useless. "At least let me take the Bible. It has no value to you." Henrietta finished cutting. She walked around to face Clara, holding up the shears like a trophy. Hair still clung to the blades, Clara's hair catching the weak winter light. "You want to know something?" Henrietta leaned close enough that Clara could smell the lavender water she always wore. "I've waited years for this. Years. Every Christmas when you sat at our table like you belonged there. Every Sunday when you walked into church on William's arm like you were something special. I knew what you were. I always knew." "And what's that?" "Nothing." Henrietta straightened up. "You're nothing. And now everyone will see it." She turned to her brothers. "Get her up. She's got until sundown to clear out. If she's still on Crawford land when the stars come up, well..." She looked at Marcus. "I'm sure the boys can think of something appropriate." Silas and Solomon grabbed Clara's arms and hauled her to her feet. Her legs had gone numb from kneeling in the snow, and she stumbled, nearly falling. "Stand up straight," Solomon sneered. "Show some dignity. Oh wait, you don't have any left." They dragged her toward the house. Her house. The home she'd made with William, where she'd nursed him through his final weeks, where she'd held his hand as he took his last breath. The windows she'd cleaned every week, the curtains she'd sewn, the garden she'd planted, that now lay buried under snow. "You can take one bag," Marcus said as they reached the porch. "Clothes and necessities only. Anything that belonged to William stays. William gave me... William's dead, and dead men don't get a say in how their property gets divided." They pushed her through the door. Inside, the fire she'd built that morning still crackled in the hearth. The house was warm, welcoming everything the world outside wasn't. Clara wanted to collapse into the chair by the fire and never move again. "Move," Silas ordered. "You're not here for a visit." She walked to the bedroom on legs that barely worked. Every step felt like walking through deep water. Her head throbbed where the shears had cut her, and she kept reaching up to touch her scalp, still unable to believe that her hair was gone. There. Right there. That's where William used to kiss the top of her head when he came in from working the cattle. Gone. All of it gone. The carpet bag was under the bed where it had sat since she'd arrived 7 years ago as a mail-order bride full of hope and terror. She pulled it out with shaking hands and opened it on the bed. What could she take? Pieces of her life could fit in this small bag. She grabbed her other dress, the blue one. William had always said it brought out her eyes. A pair of wool stockings, her warmest shawl, a hairbrush. No. What was the point of a hairbrush now? Move faster. Ezra stood in the doorway, his giggle making her skin crawl. We ain't got all day. Clara looked at the nightstand. William's journal sat there, the one he'd written in every evening. She'd found his last entry after he died, read it through tears so thick she could barely see the words. C tends to me without complaint. I chose well despite what family says. If something happens to me, I pray she finds happiness. She deserves better than the life I've given her. She reached for it. That belonged to William. Ezra stepped into the room. Means it stays. Please, it's just words. It has no value. Words about Crawford family business. Stays. Clara's hand hovered over the journal. She thought about grabbing it anyway, running, somehow escaping. But she could hear the others moving through the house, hear Henrietta opening drawers and cabinets, probably already cataloging what she planned to claim. She left the journal and moved to the dresser instead. Her mother's Bible sat in the top drawer, wrapped in the same cloth it had been wrapped in for 20 years. Clara reached for it. What's that? Ezra appeared at her elbow. My mother's Bible. It's not. It was never Crawford property. I brought it with me from Boston. Prove it. Clara opened the cloth, revealing the worn leather cover. Look, inside the front cover. Mary Catherine Abigail, 1842. That was my mother's maiden name. See, this has nothing to do with your family. Ezra frowned. For a moment, Clara dared to hope. Then Henrietta's voice came from the doorway. What's the delay? She wants to take some book. Says it was her mother's. Henrietta crossed the room and snatched the Bible from Clara's hands. She opened it, scanning the inscription. Could be forged. Could be stolen. No way to know. Henrietta, please. This stays. Something broke inside Clara's chest. Something she hadn't known was still intact. You can't, she said, and her voice came out raw, desperate. It's all I have left of her. She died when I was 7. That Bible is the only thing. Should have thought about that before you decided to disgrace our family. Henrietta tucked the Bible under her arm and walked out. Clara stood frozen. The loss of her hair, the loss of her home, the threats and the cruelty, she'd survived all of it. But this small leather book that smelled like her childhood, that held pressed flowers from her mother's funeral, that had gotten her through the darkest nights of her life. Finish packing. Ezra shoved her toward the bed. You got 5 minutes. She moved like a woman in a dream. She added the rest of her clothes to the bag. A small pouch of coins she'd hidden in a sock, her entire savings may be enough to survive a week. A photograph from her wedding day. William stern and proud, herself barely visible beneath the veil. She couldn't find anything else that was hers. Everything in this house, everything she'd touched and used and cared for over 7 years, none of it belonged to her. The Crawfords had made sure of that. Time's up. They marched her back through the house, past Henrietta, who was already rearranging furniture, past Marcus, who stood by the fire warming his hands like he owned the place. Because he did now. Somehow, in the space of an hour, they'd taken everything. At the door, Clara turned back one last time. She looked at the kitchen where she'd cooked thousands of meals, the chair where William used to sit, the window where she'd watched for his return every evening. Move. Solomon pushed her hard, and she stumbled out onto the porch. The cold hit her like a wall. Without her hair, her scalp was exposed to the bitter wind, and the pain was immediate, shocking. She could feel ice forming where the cuts from the shears still bled. You've got until sundown, Marcus repeated, stepping out behind her. Head east toward town. Maybe someone there will take pity on you, though I wouldn't count on it. Word travels fast in these parts. Word you've spread, Clara said quietly. Word that needed spreading. The county ought to know what kind of woman has been living among them. Clara looked at him, really looked at him. You know the truth, Marcus. You know I didn't do what you're accusing me of. William knew it too. He trusted me. For just a moment, something flickered in Marcus Crawford's eyes. Something that might have been doubt or shame, or the faintest echo of the decent man William had always believed his brother to be. Then it was gone. Get off our land! Clara walked down the porch steps, her carpetbag banging against her leg. The snow had started falling again, fat flakes that landed on her exposed scalp and melted into icy rivulets down her face. She didn't look back. She couldn't. If she looked back, she would break completely, and she couldn't afford to break. Not yet. The road stretched ahead, disappearing into the white curtain of falling snow. She knew the way to town, 7 miles, maybe 8. On a good day and good weather, it was a pleasant walk. Today, with the temperature dropping and the wind picking up and her head bare to the elements, she might not make it. The thought settled into her mind with strange calm. She might die today. The Crawfords knew it. That's why they'd done this now in the dead of winter with a storm coming in. They weren't just casting her out. They were killing her in a way that left their hands clean. She'd made it perhaps 100 yards from the house when she heard horses behind her. Her heart seized. Had they changed their minds? Were they coming to finish what they'd started? She turned ready to run, though she knew it would be useless. But it wasn't the Crawfords. An older woman on horseback emerged from the swirling snow, her face half hidden by a thick wool scarf. Clara recognized her after a moment, Martha Pearson, who ran the general store in town with her husband. Lord have mercy. Martha's voice carried shock and something else. Pity, maybe. Or horror. Child, what have they done to you? Clara opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she say? How could she explain? Martha glanced back toward the Crawford house, then down at Clara. Even through the snow, Clara could see the fear in the older woman's eyes. Fear of the Crawfords. Fear of what helping Clara might cost her. I can't take you with me, Martha said quickly. They'd burn our store to the ground. You understand. I'm sorry, but I can't. I know. Martha reached into her saddlebag with shaking hands. Here, take this. It's not much, but... She tossed down a bundle. Clara caught at a worn blanket and half a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. There's a shack. Martha continued, words tumbling out fast. 3 miles north near Bone Creek. Old trapper's cabin. Nobody uses it anymore. The roof might still hold. You might... She couldn't finish the sentence. Thank you, Clara said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant, like it belonged to someone else. I'm sorry. Martha was already turning her horse. God forgive me, I'm so sorry. And then she was gone, swallowed by the snow, leaving Clara alone on the road with a blanket, half a loaf of bread, and 3 miles of frozen hell between her and shelter. Clara started walking. The wind picked up as she left the main road and turned north. Within minutes, she couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. The snow wasn't falling anymore. It was flying sideways, driven by gusts that cut through her thin dress like it wasn't there. Her scalp had gone numb. She wasn't sure if that was better or worse than the burning pain. The blood from her cuts had frozen into a crust that pulled at her skin when she moved her head. 1 foot in front of the other, she told herself. That's all. Just keep moving. But her body had other ideas. The cold had seeped into her muscles, making every step an act of will. Her fingers wrapped around the handle of her carpetbag had stopped responding to commands. She couldn't feel her feet anymore, couldn't tell if she was still wearing shoes or walking barefoot through the snow. I'm going to die out here. The thought came clearly without panic. Just a simple statement of fact. The Crawfords had won. They'd taken her home, her dignity, her hair, and now they would take her life. And nobody would ever know the truth about what happened. She'd just be the shameless widow who wandered into a blizzard and froze to death. A cautionary tale. A warning. No. The word rose up from somewhere deep inside her, fierce and hot. No. She was not going to die in this snow. She was not going to let Henrietta Crawford win. She was not going to become a ghost story that Marcus told at dinner parties, laughing about the orphan who got what she deserved. Clara lifted her head against the wind and forced her legs to move faster. 3 miles. Just 3 miles. She lost track of time. The world had shrunk to nothing but white and cold, and the endless effort of putting one foot in front of the other. She fell once, then twice, then more times than she could count. Each time she got back up. Each time she told herself that the shack was just ahead, just around the next bend, just over the next rise. And then, finally, it was. The cabin materialized out of the blizzard like a mirage, a small dark shape, hunched against the hillside. Clara stumbled toward it, her numb hands scrabbling at the door until it creaked open. Inside was darkness and dust and the musty smell of abandonment, but it was out of the wind, out of the snow. That was enough. Clara collapsed onto the floor just inside the door and let the darkness take her. She woke to cold so deep it had settled into her bones. The storm still raged outside. Through the gaps in the walls, she could see snow piling up, could hear the wind screaming like something alive. But she was still here, still breathing, still fighting. She forced herself to move. Her body protested, every motion, joints creaking like old wood muscles screaming with every attempt to respond. But she got to her knees, then to her feet. A narrow bunk sat against the far wall. An old stove squatted in the corner, its pipe leading up through the roof. And beside the stove, a miracle she hadn't dared hope for, a pile of wood dried and ready for burning. It took her 5 tries to get a fire started. Her fingers wouldn't cooperate and she'd lost feeling in them hours ago. But finally a flame caught. Then another. Then the wood was crackling and popping and sending heat radiating through the tiny space. Clara huddled as close as she dared, watching her frozen skin slowly come back to painful life. The warmth brought feeling back to her scalp too, and with it came the full horror of what had been done to her. She raised one trembling hand to her head. Stubble. That's all that was left. Uneven, patchy stubble interrupted by the rough texture of dried blood where the shears had cut too deep. She traced the damage with her fingertips, mapping the geography of her humiliation. "You're nothing now," Marcus had said. Was he right? She pulled the blanket Martha had given her around her shoulders and stared into the fire. Her mother's Bible was gone. William's journal was gone. Her home, her life, her identity. All of it stripped away in a single morning. Who was she now? A survivor. Something whispered in the back of her mind. You walked 3 miles through a blizzard with no hair and nothing but the clothes on your back, and you lived. That's who you are. But survival wasn't the same as living. And right now, huddled in this forgotten shack, with nothing but half a loaf of bread between her and starvation, Clara couldn't see a path forward. The Crawfords had made sure of that. By tomorrow, everyone in the county would know what they'd done, or rather, what they'd said she'd done. No decent establishment would hire her. No respectable family would take her in. She was marked, ruined, finished, unless someone believed her, unless someone saw through the lies, unless somehow, somewhere, there was still a chance. Keep breathing, she told herself. Get through tonight. Tomorrow will take care of itself. She ate a small piece of the bread, carefully making it last, and drank snow melted in her cupped hands. The fire crackled and popped, throwing shadows that danced across the walls. Outside, the wind howled like a pack of wolves closing in on wounded prey. And somewhere in the back of Clara's mind, a small voice reminded her that this wasn't over. The Crawfords might have won the first battle, but the war was far from finished. She curled up on the bunk, pulling the thin blanket tight, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would come, and when it did, she would be ready. The fire had burned down to embers when she heard the sound. Hoofbeats, coming closer. Clara's eyes flew open, her heart hammering against her ribs. Had the Crawfords found her? Had they decided that exile wasn't punishment enough? She scrambled off the bunk, looking wildly for something she could use as a weapon. There by the stove, a rusted poker. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The hoofbeats stopped outside the cabin. Clara pressed herself against the wall beside the door, poker raised. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them steady. If the Crawfords had come to finish her off, they'd find that she wasn't going quietly. A knock at the door, firm but not aggressive. Then a voice. Deep. Male. Unfamiliar. "Ma'am, I know you're in there. I saw the smoke from your fire." Clara didn't answer. It could be a trick. It could be one of Marcus's friends, someone sent to drag her back for whatever appropriate punishment the Crawford brothers had devised. "My name is Nathaniel Hartwell. I own a ranch about 10 miles west of here. I'm not here to hurt you." Still, she said nothing. A pause. Then, "I heard what happened. What the Crawfords did. I'm here to help if you'll let me." Clara's grip on the poker tightened. Nobody helped. That was the lesson she'd learned today. Martha Pearson had been too afraid. The whole town would be too afraid. Why should this stranger be any different, ma'am? The voice was patient, steady. "It's 17 degrees out here and dropping. I'm not leaving without knowing you're safe. But I'd rather have this conversation inside where we're both not freezing to death." She could hear something in his voice. Not pity, she'd had enough of pity. Not morbid curiosity. Something else. Something that sounded almost like respect. Slowly, Clara reached for the door handle. "I have a weapon," she said through the wood. "I'll use it." I'd expect nothing less from a woman who walked 3 miles through a blizzard. She opened the door. He was tall. That was the first thing she noticed. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and eyes the color of amber in firelight. He wore a rancher's coat, thick and practical, and a wide-brimmed hat dusted with snow. He looked at her shorn head, at the blood crusted on her scalp, at the poker still clutched in her trembling hands, and his expression didn't change. Didn't flicker with disgust or judgment or anything she'd expected. "You're coming with me," he said simply. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Clara felt something that might have been hope. Clara stared at the stranger in the doorway, her fingers still white-knuckled around the poker. The wind howled behind him, driving snow into the cabin, but he didn't move. Just stood there, patient as stone, waiting for her answer. "I don't know you," she said. "No, ma'am, you don't." "Then why should I trust you?" Nathaniel Hartwell removed his hat, a gesture of respect that caught her off guard. "You shouldn't. Not yet. Trust is earned, not given. But I can tell you this, I know Jacob Brennan. He works for me now, has for 2 months, and he told me exactly what passed between you and him." Clara's breath caught. "Jacob told you?" "He came to me this morning half out of his mind with guilt. Said the Crawfords twisted an innocent conversation into something ugly. Said they used it as an excuse to—" His jaw tightened. "Well, I can see what they used it for." She reached up instinctively to touch her bare scalp, then stopped herself. She wouldn't show weakness. Not again. Not ever again. "Even if that's true," she said carefully, "why would you involve yourself? The Crawfords have power in this county. They have friends. Anyone who helps me. The Crawfords are cowards and bullies." His voice carried no heat, just cold certainty. "They prey on those who can't fight back. Well, ma'am, I can fight back, and I'm offering you my protection." "In exchange for what?" Something flickered in his amber eyes. Not offense, something closer to approval. "Smart question. Most folks in your position would have jumped at any offer." "Most folks in my position are dead by now." "Which is exactly why you're not most folks." He stepped back from the doorway, giving her space. "I'm not asking for anything improper if that's your concern. I need help at my ranch. My housekeeper Consuelo, she's getting on in years. Place has grown too big for her to manage alone. I'm offering you honest work for honest wages. A room in the main house. Protection from anyone who'd do you harm." Clara studied him. The set of his shoulders. The way he held himself confident, but not aggressive. The lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into harsh sun, watching over land and livestock. "Why?" she asked again. The truth this time: nobody risks making enemies of the Crawfords for a stranger. Nobody. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Softer. Older. "My wife died 2 years ago. Consumption. Took her slow piece by piece while I watched, and couldn't do a damn thing to stop it." He paused. "Toward the end, when she could barely breathe, she made me promise something. Said I had to use whatever power I had to help those who couldn't help themselves. Said if I didn't, her death would mean nothing." Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. "And when I heard what happened to you yesterday," Nathaniel continued, "heard how they shamed you and cast you out with nowhere to go, I knew Sarah would want me to act." "Your wife sounds like she was a good woman." "The best I ever knew." He put his hat back on. "Now, ma'am, I've got 2 horses outside, and this storm isn't getting any better. You can stay here and try to survive on half a loaf of bread, or you can come with me and have a fighting chance. Choice is yours." Clara looked around the cabin. The dying fire, the thin blanket, the darkness pressing in from every corner. Then she looked at the man in the doorway, this stranger who'd ridden through a blizzard to find her. She set down the poker. "I'll need to get my things." "Take your time. I'll be outside with the horses." He disappeared into the swirling snow, leaving her alone with her decision. Clara gathered her carpet bag, her fingers trembling from cold or fear or hope she couldn't tell. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, took one last look at the shack that had saved her life, and walked out into the storm. Nathaniel had brought a second horse, a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze on her forehead. He helped Clara mount without comment, his hands respectful and brief. "Can you ride?" he asked. "A little. William taught me." "This is Buttercup. She's steady as they come. Just hold on and let her follow my lead." They set off into the blizzard, Nathaniel's horse breaking trail through the deepening snow. Clara hunched low over Buttercup's neck, trying to protect her exposed scalp from the cutting wind. Every gust felt like knives against her skin. "Here." She looked up to find Nathaniel holding out his hat. "I can't take your... I've got hair to keep my head warm. You don't." His voice was matter-of-fact, without pity. "Take it." She did. The hat was too big, but it blocked the wind, and the relief was immediate. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. The Crawfords will come calling once they hear where you've gone." "Let them come." The words surprised her. Where had that steel come from? Nathaniel glanced back at her, and she could have sworn she saw him smile. They rode for what felt like hours. The storm began to ease as they climbed into the foothills, the snow falling softer now, the wind dying to a whisper. Clara's body ached from cold and exhaustion, but she forced herself to stay upright in the saddle. She would not fall. She would not show weakness. "There," Nathaniel said, finally pointing ahead. Clara lifted her head and saw it a ranch spreading across a valley like something from a dream. The main house sat solid and welcoming against the white landscape smoke rising from its chimneys, windows glowing with warm light. Barns and outbuildings dotted the property, and even through the fading storm she could see cattle on the distant hillsides. "Iron Creek Ranch," Nathaniel said. "Been building it for 15 years. Started with nothing but 160 acres of scrubland nobody wanted. It's beautiful. It's home." He urged his horse forward. "Come on. Consuelo will have hot food waiting." As they rode through the main gate, Clara noticed men emerging from the buildings. Ranch hands, their faces curious, but not hostile. They touched their hats as she passed, a gesture of respect that brought fresh tears to her eyes. Nobody had treated her with respect in a very long time. A woman appeared on the porch of the main house as they approached. She was perhaps 55 round and solid, with dark hair, streaked gray, and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. She watched them approach without expression. "Consuelo," Nathaniel called out. "We've got company." The woman descended the porch steps, moving with surprising grace for her size. She walked straight to Clara's horse and looked up at her, taking in the too big hat, the shorn head, the haunted eyes. "Dios mío," she breathed. Then louder, "Get down from there, child. You look half dead." Clara tried to dismount, but her legs had gone numb from hours in the saddle. She would have fallen if Consuelo hadn't caught her strong arms, wrapping around her like a mother's embrace. "I've got you," Consuelo murmured. "I've got you now." And Clara, who had held herself together through the shearing and the exile and the endless walk through the blizzard, finally broke. She collapsed against this stranger's shoulder and wept. Consuelo held her through it all, stroking her back, murmuring in Spanish, "Ya pequeña, you're safe now. Nobody hurts you here." When the tears finally stopped, Clara pulled back, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I don't usually—" "Hush." Consuelo cupped her face in work-roughened hands. "You've earned those tears. Now come inside. Hot bath, hot food, clean clothes. Then sleep. Everything else can wait until tomorrow." The main house was warm and bright, filled with the smell of cooking food and burning wood. Clara let Consuelo lead her through the rooms, barely registering the comfortable furniture, the books lining the walls, the evidence of a life built with care over many years. The room they gave her was more than she'd dared hope for. A real bed with clean sheets. A window overlooking the mountains. A fire already crackling in the small hearth. "These were my daughters," Consuelo said, laying 2 dresses on the bed. "She's married now, living in San Francisco. They should fit you well enough." "I can't, this is too much." "You can and you will." Consuelo's tone brooked no argument. "Tomorrow you work, tonight you heal. That's how things are done on this ranch." She left Clara alone with the dresses, the warm bed, the fire's gentle crackle. Clara stood in the middle of the room, overwhelmed by the sudden safety of it all. This morning, she'd been Clara Whitmore, widow and property owner. By noon, she'd been nothing. Less than nothing. And now somehow, she was here. In a stranger's house, wearing a stranger's clothes, being treated with a kindness she couldn't understand. She caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the washstand and froze. The woman looking back was unrecognizable. Gaunt face, hollow eyes, scalp covered in uneven stubble and crusted blood. She looked like something dragged from a grave. "This is what they made me," she whispered to her reflection. "This is what they wanted everyone to see." But even as she said the words, something else stirred. A small voice in the back of her mind, stubborn and fierce. "This is what they tried to make you. It doesn't have to be what you become." Clara touched the mirror, her fingertips meeting the cold glass. "I survived," she said softly. "I'm still here." It wasn't much, but right now it was enough. A knock at the door made her turn. Nathaniel's voice came through the wood, careful and respectful. "Supper's ready when you are, ma'am. No rush. Consuelo's keeping a plate warm." "I'll be down in a moment." She heard his footsteps retreat. Then silence broken only by the fire and the wind outside. Clara washed her face with water from the basin, wincing as the cloth touched her wounded scalp. She changed into one of the dresses Consuelo had left, simple gray wool, warm and practical. Then she took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and went downstairs. The kitchen was large and warm, dominated by a long wooden table that could seat a dozen people. Tonight, only 3 places were set: Nathaniel at the head, Consuelo to his right, and an empty chair waiting for Clara. "Sit," Consuelo commanded, already ladling stew into a bowl. "Eat, your skin and bones." Clara sat. The first bite of stew was so good she nearly wept again. hot and rich, full of beef and vegetables and herbs she couldn't name. She hadn't realized how it was until that moment. "Slow down," Consuelo chided gently. "It's not going anywhere." "When did you eat last?" Nathaniel asked. Clara had to think. "Yesterday morning. Before." He and Consuelo exchanged a look. "Then eat," Nathaniel said. "We'll talk tomorrow when you're stronger." But Clara shook her head. "No. I need to know what happens next. I need to understand what I'm agreeing to." Nathaniel nodded slowly, respecting her decision. "Fair enough. Ask your questions." "The Crawfords. They'll come for me." "They will." "What happens then?" "They find out that threatening you means threatening me, and I don't take kindly to threats. You'd make enemies for a woman you don't know. I'd make enemies for a woman who was wronged." Nathaniel's voice was calm but certain. "What they did to you, the shearing the lies, casting you out in a blizzard, that's not justice. That's cruelty. And I've spent my whole life standing against cruelty." Clara set down her spoon. "Why?" The question hung in the air. She saw Consuelo glance at Nathaniel, saw something pass between them, a warning maybe, or an encouragement. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. "I had a sister once, Hannah. She was 5 years younger than me, sweet as spring water, never had a mean word for anyone." His voice had gone distant, lost in memory. "When she was 16, she married a man our parents chose for her, rich merchant from St. Louis. Seemed like a good match." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "He hurt her," Nathaniel continued. "Beat her. Degraded her in ways I won't speak of at this table. She tried to tell our parents, but they wouldn't believe her. Said she must have done something to deserve it. Said a wife's duty was to submit. What happened to her? She fell down the stairs one night. That's what her husband said anyway. Terrible accident." Nathaniel's hands had curled into fists on the table. "She was 19 years old. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "I was 16 when it happened. Too young to do anything, too young to stop it. Too young to even understand what I was seeing until it was too late." He looked up at her, and his amber eyes held a grief so old it had become part of him. "I promised myself then that I'd never stand by again. Never watch cruelty happen and do nothing. That's why I built this ranch. That's why I took in Consuelo when she had nowhere to go. That's why I'm offering you a place here. Because I remind you of your sister. Because you survived what should have killed you, and you're still sitting here asking questions instead of crying in a corner." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Hannah would have liked you." Clara looked at this man, this stranger, who'd ridden through a blizzard to save her, who'd shared his deepest pain, to explain his actions, and made a decision. "I'll work," she said. "I'll earn my keep. But I won't be charity, and I won't be a burden." Whoa. "Wouldn't expect anything less. And if the Crawfords come?" "When they come." "When they come," she corrected herself. "I won't hide. I won't cower. I've done enough of that for one lifetime." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "Then we understand each other." Consuelo reached across the table and squeezed Clara's hand. "Welcome to Iron Creek Ranch, mija. Now finish your stew before it gets cold." Clara ate. And for the first time since William's death, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. The next morning came too quickly. Clara woke to pale winter light streaming through her window, and the sound of activity outside, men calling to each other, horses whinnying, the rhythm of a working ranch coming alive. She'd slept deeper than she had in months. The bed was warm, the room was safe, and for a few precious moments she'd forgotten everything that had happened. Then she touched her head and remembered. She rose and dressed. In the other dress, Consuelo had left blue wool, this time the color of a winter sky. She avoided the mirror. She wasn't ready to face that reflection again. Downstairs, the kitchen was already bustling. Consuelo stood at the stove cooking enough food to feed an army. The back door kept opening as ranch hands came in, grabbed plates, and headed back out to their duties. "Good morning." Consuelo smiled when she saw Clara. "Sit. Coffee's hot." Clara sat accepting the cup Consuelo pressed into her hands. The coffee was strong and bitter, exactly what she needed. "Where's Mr. Hartwell?" "Nathaniel. Call him Nathaniel, or he'll think you're talking about his father's ghost." Consuelo set a plate of eggs and biscuits in front of her. "He's in the barn checking on a mare that's about to foal. He'll be in soon." As if summoned by the words, the back door opened and Nathaniel entered, stamping snow from his boots. He'd been out in the cold, his cheeks were red, his breath still visible, but he moved with the easy energy of a man in his element. "Morning," he said, pouring himself coffee. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in a long time." "Good." He sat across from her, wrapping his hands around the cup. "We need to talk about what happens next." Clara set down her fork. "I'm ready." "The Crawfords will have heard by now that you're here. Probably heard last night. Word travels fast in these parts. They'll come today. Might be this morning, might be this afternoon, but they'll come." "What do we do?" "We don't hide, and we don't apologize. When they ride up, you stand with me on that porch. You let them see you're alive, you're safe, and you're not going anywhere. They'll make threats. They always do." Nathaniel's voice was calm. "But threats are just words, and words can't hurt you unless you let them." Clara thought about that. Words had hurt her plenty over the years. Henrietta's barbs. Margaret's disappointment. The whispers that followed her through every church service and town gathering. But maybe words only had power if you believed them. "All right," she said. "I'll stand with you." "Good." He drained his coffee and stood. "Consuelo will show you around the ranch today, introduce you to the hands. Get to know the place. When the Crawfords come, you'll know you're not alone." He was at the door when she called out, "Nathaniel?" He turned. "Thank you for all of this. I know I haven't earned it yet, but—" "You survived," he said simply. "That's earned plenty." And then he was gone, leaving Clara with Consuelo and a plate of food, and the strange, fragile feeling of being valued. The tour of the ranch took most of the morning. Consuelo led her through the main house first, explaining Clara's duties, cooking, cleaning, mending, all the 1,000 small tasks that kept a household running. Then they moved outside, visiting the barns and outbuildings, meeting the men who worked the land. Miguel Santos, the foreman, was a lean Mexican man with kind eyes and a quiet manner. He touched his hat when Consuelo introduced Clara and said simply, "Bienvenida, señora. You're safe here." The other hands followed his lead. Pete and Johnny brothers from Texas, with matching drawls. Old Tom, who wasn't that old, but had worked the ranch longest. Chen, who'd come from China to build railroads and stayed to work cattle. Not one of them stared at her head. Not one of them treated her like the scandal the Crawfords were surely spreading. They touched their hats, nodded politely, and went back to their work. "Nathaniel chose them," Consuelo explained as they walked back to the main house. "Every man on this ranch he chose because they know how to treat people right. No bullies, no cruel men. Anyone who shows that side of themselves doesn't last long here. He's built something special." "He has, and now you're part of it." They were climbing the porch steps when the sound of horses made them both freeze. Riders, coming fast from the east. "Get Nathaniel," Consuelo said sharply. "Now." But Nathaniel was already emerging from the barn, Miguel at his side. More hands appeared from the outbuildings, their movements casual, but their eyes alert. Clara stood on the porch and watched the riders approach. 6 of them. She recognized Marcus's bulk, Henrietta's thin figure, the matching shapes of the twins. Her stomach clenched, but she forced herself to stay still. To breathe. "I won't cower. I won't hide." Nathaniel climbed the steps and stood beside her. His hand brushed her elbow, brief, reassuring. "Remember," he said quietly, "they're just words." The Crawfords pulled up at the edge of the yard, keeping their distance. Marcus's eyes found Clara immediately, and his face twisted with something between and disbelief. "Well, well," he called out. "The whore found herself a new protector." "Watch your mouth, Crawford." Nathaniel's voice carried across the yard, cold and hard. "You're on my land now. Your land harbors a criminal, a woman who what? Talked to a ranch hand about fixing a fence." Nathaniel stepped forward, and Clara saw several of the Crawfords shift nervously in their saddles. "Jacob Brennan works for me. I know exactly what passed between him and Mrs. Whitmore, and I know exactly what lies you've been spreading." Henrietta pushed her horse forward. "Lies, look at her. She's showing herself in public like she has no shame. She has nothing to be ashamed of." Nathaniel's words fell like stones. "You're the ones who should be ashamed. Shearing a widow like she was livestock, driving her into a blizzard to die, stealing her property while her husband's body was barely cold. That property belongs to our family. Does it? Because I've sent word to Judge Harrison in Cheyenne. He'll be very interested to hear how the Crawford family interprets inheritance law." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara watched Marcus's face change, saw the calculation behind his eyes. "You're bluffing," Marcus said finally. "Try me." Silas, or was it Solomon, shifted in his saddle. "Boss, maybe we should—" "Shut up." Marcus didn't take his eyes off Nathaniel. "You don't know what you're getting into, Hartwell. This woman dishonored our family. She needs to answer for it." "She's answered enough." Nathaniel's voice was quiet now, almost gentle, but somehow more dangerous for it. "She walked 3 miles through a blizzard with nothing but the clothes on her back. She nearly died from what you did to her. If that's not enough punishment for the crime of talking to a neighbor, I don't know what is. She belongs to us. She belongs to herself." Clara stepped forward before she could stop herself. The words came from somewhere deep inside her, somewhere the Crawfords hadn't managed to touch. "I was William's wife, not his property, not yours to dispose of." Henrietta's face contorted with rage. "You don't get to speak. You're nothing but I'm a widow who nursed her husband through his final illness." Clara's voice was steady now, stronger than she'd ever heard it. "I held his hand while he died. I sat by his bed for 2 weeks straight, barely sleeping, barely eating. And 3 days after I buried him, you came to my door with shears. Because I was already what grieving exhausted, trying to figure out how to survive without the only person in this county who ever showed me kindness." Clara took another step forward. "You didn't punish me for talking to Jacob Brennan. You punished me because you could. Because you'd been waiting 7 years for a chance to destroy me, and you finally got one. That's not... Isn't it?" Clara looked at Marcus. "You never wanted William to marry me. None of you did. A city orphan with no family, no connections, no dowry. I wasn't good enough for your precious brother. And every day of those 7 years, you made sure I knew it." Marcus's jaw worked, but no words came out. "So you can call me whatever names you want," Clara continued. "You can spread whatever lies you choose, but you don't get to pretend this was about justice. This was about hate, pure and simple." The silence stretched. Clara could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the eyes of everyone in the yard on her. She'd never spoken like this before. Never stood up for herself, not really. William had always told her to keep the peace, to not make waves, to accept his family's cruelty as the price of being his wife. But William was gone, and she was done being quiet. Nathaniel broke the silence. "You've heard her. Now get off my land." Marcus's face had gone purple. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is." Nathaniel's hand drifted to the gun at his hip, casual, almost lazy, but the message was clear. "You come here again making threats, you'll find out just how serious I am about protecting the people under my roof. That's not a promise. That's a fact." The Crawfords hesitated. Clara could see them calculating 6 of them against Nathaniel, and his hands surrounded on their enemy's territory. The math didn't work in their favor. "Let's go." Marcus finally growled. He wheeled his horse around, then looked back over his shoulder. But you remember this Hartwell. You remember you chose her over the good families of this county. When it comes back to bite, you don't say I didn't warn you. They rode out in a cloud of snow and wounded pride. Clara watched them go until they disappeared over the horizon. Only then did she realize she was shaking. Easy. Nathaniel's hand was on her arm, steadying her. It's over. They're gone. For now. For now, he agreed. But you held your own. Yeah, that counts for something. Clara looked up at him. I've never talked to them like that before. Never stood up to... She broke off, overwhelmed. How did it feel? She thought about it. The terror, yes. The way her heart had pounded and her voice had wanted to crack. But underneath all that, it felt like being alive, she said slowly. Really alive for the first time in years. Nathaniel smiled, a real smile this time, warm and approving. That's a start. Now come inside. You're still healing, and Consuelo will have my hide if I keep you out in the cold. Clara let him lead her back into the house. As she crossed the threshold, she looked back one more time at the empty yard, the road the Crawfords had taken. They would be back. She knew that. This war was far from over. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Clara Whitmore believed she might actually win it. The days that followed settled into a rhythm Clara hadn't expected. She woke before dawn, helped Consuelo prepare breakfast for the hands, then spent her mornings learning the 1,000 small tasks that kept Iron Creek Ranch running. Afternoons, she mended clothes, organized supplies, helped wherever she was needed. Evenings, she ate with Nathaniel and Consuelo at that long kitchen table, listening to stories of the ranch, the land, the people who'd built lives here. Her hair began to grow back. Just a soft fuzz at first, darker than before, but it was something. A sign that her body was healing, even as her heart remained bruised. You're getting stronger. Consuelo observed one morning watching Clara knead bread dough with practiced hands. When you first came here, I thought the wind might blow you away. I feel stronger. Clara pushed the heels of her palms into the dough. I didn't know I could feel this way. What way? Clara paused, searching for the right words. Like I'm allowed to take up space. Like I'm not just waiting for the next bad thing to happen. Consuelo nodded slowly. That's what safety feels like, mija. Most people never know they were missing it until they finally have it. The kitchen door opened, and Nathaniel entered with a gust of cold air. Snow dusted his shoulders. It had been falling steadily for 2 days now, adding to the drifts that already reached the windowsills. We've got a problem, he said without preamble. Jake just rode in from town. The Crawfords have been busy. Clara's hands stilled on the dough. What kind of busy? The kind that involves spreading stories. Nathaniel pulled off his gloves, his jaw tight. They're saying you tried to poison William before he died. That's why he got sick. And they're saying you seduced Jacob to help you cover it up. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She'd expected more lies, more slander, but this... That's insane, she breathed. William died of pneumonia. Dr. Whitfield can testify to that. He was there at the end. Dr. Whitfield has been persuaded to visit his sister in California, left 3 days ago, might be gone for months. They paid him off. Or threatened him. Either way, he's not here to contradict their story. Clara gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles going white. So what do? We fight back. Nathaniel crossed to the stove and poured himself coffee. I've already sent word to Judge Harrison about the property dispute. Now I'm sending another letter about these new accusations. Defamation, conspiracy to defraud. Whatever legal terms will make him sit up and take notice. And in the meantime, we keep doing what we're doing. You stay here, you work. You show everyone who sees you that you're exactly who I say you are, a woman who was wronged, not a criminal. Clara turned back to the dough, pounding it harder than necessary. I hate this. I hate being helpless while they destroy my reputation. You're not helpless. Nathaniel's voice was quiet but firm. You stood up to them when they came here, told them the truth to their faces. That's not nothing. It feels like nothing when they're out there spreading poison about me. Poison spreads fast, but it doesn't last. Truth is slower, but it sticks. He set down his cup. Trust me, Clara. I've seen this play out before. The Crawfords think they're winning, but they're making enemies every time they open their mouths. People don't like bullies even when they're too scared to say so. A knock at the back door interrupted them. Miguel entered, his face grim. Boss, there's something you need to see. Out by the north fence. Nathaniel's expression hardened. What is it? Better you see for yourself. They rode out together, Nathaniel, Miguel, and Clara, who'd insisted on coming despite Consuelo's protests. The snow had eased to a light flurry, but the cold was bitter, seeping through Clara's borrowed coat and settling into her bones. They found it at the fence line, 3 of Nathaniel's cattle shot dead, and left where they fell. The snow around them was stained red, already freezing into a dark crust. Crawford work, Miguel said, spitting into the snow. Has to be. Nathaniel dismounted and crouched beside the nearest animal. Clean shots. Professional. They wanted us to find this. A message, Clara said quietly. A warning. Nathaniel straightened up, his face unreadable. They're telling us what happens if we don't hand you over. Clara stared at the dead cattle, at the senseless destruction. These animals had done nothing wrong. They'd died simply because she existed, because Nathaniel had chosen to protect her. Maybe I should leave, she said. Find somewhere else to go. If I'm gone, they'll stop. They won't stop. Nathaniel's voice was sharp. You think this ends with you leaving? The Crawfords don't want you gone, Clara. They want you destroyed. They want everyone in this county to know that nobody crosses them and survives. If you run now, they'll hunt you. And they'll use your running as proof that everything they've said is true. So what do? You stay. You fight. And when they finally go too far, and they will, we make them pay for every lie, every threat, every dead animal. He swung back onto his horse. Miguel, get some of the boys out here to deal with this. And double the patrols. I want eyes on every inch of our perimeter. See, boss. They rode back to the ranch in heavy silence. Clara kept seeing those cattle in her mind, the red snow, the waste of it all. The Crawfords had done this to send a message, but the message they'd sent wasn't the one they intended. They'd shown her exactly what kind of people they were, and they'd shown her that running would never be an option. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She stood at her window watching the snow fall in the moonlight, thinking about William. About the 7 years they'd spent together. About all the things she'd accepted, all the cruelties she'd endured from his family, all the times she'd told herself it would get better. It had never gotten better. And now she knew it never would have. A soft knock at her door made her turn. Come in? Consuelo entered, carrying 2 cups of something that steamed in the cold air. I thought you might need this. Chamomile. Good for sleepless nights. Clara accepted the cup gratefully. How did you know I was awake? I've been doing this a long time, mija. Consuelo settled into the chair by the fire. I know what a haunted woman looks like. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. Can I ask you something? Anything. How did you end up here? Nathaniel said he took you in, but he didn't say why. Consuelo was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. That's a long story. I have time. The older woman sighed, but there was no reluctance in it, just the weight of old memories. I came to this country with my husband in 1855, Manuel. He was a good man, a hard worker. We were going to build a life here, start a family. Her voice softened. We never got the chance. Bandits attacked our wagon train 3 days from here, killed Manuel, killed most of the others. I only survived because they thought I was dead. I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago. Consuelo took a sip of her tea. I wandered for days after that. No food, no water, no idea where I was going. I just walked until I couldn't walk anymore. And then Nathaniel found me. Like he found me. Like he found you. Consuelo smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. He was younger then, barely 30. Sarah was still alive. They took me in, nursed me back to health, gave me a place to belong. I've been here ever since. Clara set down her cup. He collects us, doesn't he, broken people? He gives us a chance to put ourselves back together. That's different. Consuelo leaned forward. Listen to me, Clara. What happened to you was evil. What the Crawfords did, there's no excuse for it. But you're not broken. You're wounded. And wounds heal. Some wounds leave scars. Yes, but scars are just proof that you survived. Consuelo reached out and touched Clara's hand. The hair will grow back. The cuts will fade. And one day you'll look in the mirror and see a woman who walked through fire and came out stronger. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I don't feel strong. You don't have to feel it yet. You just have to keep going until you do. They sat together in comfortable silence, drinking their tea, watching the fire burn low. When Consuelo finally rose to leave, she paused at the door. One more thing, mija. Yes. Nathaniel is a good man, the best I've ever known. But he carries wounds too, wounds he doesn't talk about. She met Clara's eyes. Be gentle with him, and let him be gentle with you. After she left, Clara sat for a long time thinking about wounds and scars and the strange paths that led people to find each other. The next weeks brought more harassment from the Crawfords. Fence lines cut in the night, a water trough poisoned, 2 more cattle found dead. Nathaniel documented everything, sending reports to Judge Harrison, building a case that grew thicker by the day. But it also brought something else, allies. Martha Pearson was the first. She arrived at the ranch one afternoon, her face pale with determination, carrying a basket of supplies. I should have done more, she said when Clara opened the door. That day on the road, I should have taken you with me. You gave me what you could. It was enough to save my life. It wasn't enough. Martha's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I was a coward. We all were. But I'm done being afraid of them. Whatever you need, whatever I can do to help, I'm here. She wasn't the only one. Over the following days, others came. The pastor's wife bringing blankets and quiet support. A rancher from the next valley offering to testify about the Crawfords' long history of intimidation. A young woman named Sarah Miller, who'd been engaged to Josiah Crawford until she'd seen how the family really operated. He's not like the others, Sarah said of Josiah. There's good in him, but he's too weak to stand up to Marcus and Henrietta. He does what they tell him because he's afraid of what happens if he doesn't. That's not an excuse, Clara said. No, it's not. Sarah looked down at her hands. But I thought you should know. Not all of them are evil. Some of them are just trapped. The information settled into Clara's mind, a puzzle piece she wasn't sure where to place. Then came the day that changed everything. Clara was in the barn helping Miguel sort through supplies when she heard the commotion. Shouts, running footsteps, the sharp crack of a gunshot. She rushed outside to find chaos. A wagon had arrived while she was in the barn, a family by the look of it. A man, a woman, 3 children huddled together. The man was bleeding from a wound on his arm, and the woman was screaming something Clara couldn't understand. Nathaniel was already there, issuing orders directing the hands. Clara ran toward him. What happened? Ambush on the road. His face was grim. They were heading to town when riders came out of nowhere, shot at them, tried to run them off the road. The Crawfords. The riders wore masks, but the description matches. Nathaniel turned to the injured man. Sir, can you tell us what happened? The man, thin, exhausted, clearly terrified, clutched his bleeding arm. We're just passing through. Came from Oregon heading south. They stopped us, asked if we were going to the whore's hideout. When my wife said she didn't know what they meant, they started shooting." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "Attacked innocent people because of me. They attacked innocent people because they're monsters." Nathaniel's voice was hard. "This isn't on you, Clara. This is on them." But Clara couldn't shake the guilt. These people, this family with their children and their dreams of a new life, had nearly died because the Crawfords wanted to send her a message. She helped Consuelo tend to the wounded man, while Nathaniel made arrangements for the family to stay until they were fit to travel. The children were young, the youngest barely 4, and they clung to their mother with wide, frightened eyes. "I'm sorry," Clara told the woman. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." The woman, her name was Eleanor, studied Clara for a long moment, taking in her short hair, her haunted eyes, the way she carried herself like someone who'd learned to expect the worst. "You're her, aren't you? The one they're spreading stories about." Clara nodded, unable to speak. "They said you were a murderess, a seductress, a woman so evil that God himself had marked her with baldness." Eleanor's voice was flat, recounting the lies like items on a list. "But looking at you now, all I see is someone who's been hurt, someone who's surviving. That doesn't excuse what happened to your family." "No, but it explains it." Eleanor reached out and took Clara's hand. "My grandmother used to say that you can judge a person by their enemies. If the people spreading those stories are the same people who shot at my husband in front of our children, then I reckon their stories aren't worth the breath it takes to tell them." Clara couldn't respond. The kindness was too unexpected, too undeserved. She squeezed Eleanor's hand and fled before the tears could fall. That night, Clara found Nathaniel on the porch, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. The sky had cleared, and stars blazed overhead, cold and brilliant. "It's getting worse," she said quietly, joining him at the railing. "Yes." "When does it end?" Nathaniel was silent for a long moment. "It ends when they go too far and the law finally has to act. Or it ends when they decide we're not worth the trouble. Or it ends in blood." He turned to look at her, his amber eyes reflecting the starlight. "I want you to be prepared for that possibility, Clara. The Crawfords are escalating. Every attack, every lie, every dead animal, they're building toward something, and when it comes, it's going to be violent." "Are you trying to scare me?" "I'm trying to be honest with you. You deserve that." Clara considered his words. The fear was there, of course, it never really left. But underneath it, she found something else, something that felt like steel. "I'm not going to run," she said. "I know. And I'm not going to hide. I know that too. So what do we do?" Nathaniel turned back to the stars. "We get ready. We document everything. We build our case and wait for the law to catch up. And if the law fails us..." His hand drifted to the gun at his hip. "We make sure we're ready to defend ourselves." Clara nodded slowly. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the truth, and she was done living lies. "Nathaniel." "Yes." "Why did you really come for me that day? The whole truth." He was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Because when I heard what they'd done to you, I saw Hannah. I saw Sarah. I saw every woman I've ever known who was hurt by men who thought their strength gave them the right to destroy." He paused. "And I saw a chance to finally do something right, to save someone I couldn't save before. I'm not Hannah or Sarah. No, you're Clara." He looked at her, then really looked at her, and something passed between them that Clara couldn't name. "And you're worth saving on your own account. Not because of who you remind me of, but because of who you are." Clara felt her heart skip. This was dangerous territory. She was a widow of barely a month, a woman with nothing to her name dependent on this man's charity. She had no business feeling the warmth that was spreading through her chest, but she felt it anyway. "We should go inside," she said quietly. It's cold. It is. Neither of them moved. Clara, Nathaniel started. Don't. She held up a hand. Whatever you're going to say, don't say it yet. There's too much happening. Too much at stake. I can't add anything else to the weight I'm carrying. He nodded slowly, accepting her words. When you're ready. If I'm ever ready. When? He repeated firmly. You will be, and I'll wait. Clara turned and walked inside, her heart pounding. She didn't look back. If she looked back, she might do something foolish, might say something she couldn't take back. But as she climbed the stairs to her room, she realized something had shifted. Something fundamental. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was fighting. For her dignity, for her future, for the possibility of a life she'd never dared to imagine. The Crawfords wanted her destroyed. They would find that Clara Whitmore was much harder to break than they'd anticipated. The letter from Judge Harrison arrived on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the attack on the Oregon family. Clara was helping Consuelo with breakfast when Nathaniel came in from the cold, an envelope in his hand, and something like triumph in his eyes. It's happening, he said, setting the letter on the table. The judge has reviewed our evidence. He's ordering a formal hearing in Cheyenne. The Crawfords have to answer for everything. The property theft, the defamation, the attacks. Clara's hands trembled as she picked up the letter. The words swam before her eyes. Legal language she barely understood, but the meaning was clear. Someone in authority had finally listened. When? She asked. 2 weeks. We'll need to travel to Cheyenne, present our case. The Crawfords will be there too. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. It won't be pleasant. They'll say everything they can think of to discredit you. I know. You'll have to face them. In public. In front of everyone. Clara set down the letter and met his eyes. Good. I want to face them. I want everyone to see who's telling the truth and who's lying. Consuelo crossed herself. Gracias a Dios. Finally some justice. But Nathaniel's expression remained guarded. Don't celebrate yet. The Crawfords have friends in high places. Money, influence. This hearing is a chance, not a guarantee. It's more than I had a month ago, Clara said quietly. A month ago I was dying in a blizzard with nothing but half a loaf of bread. Now I have evidence, witnesses, and someone willing to stand with me. That's not nothing. Nathaniel's face softened. No, it's not nothing at all. The 2 weeks before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation. Nathaniel gathered statements from everyone willing to speak. Martha Pearson, the rancher from the next valley. Sarah Miller, even the Oregon family who'd agreed to delay their journey south to testify about the ambush. Clara spent hours with Nathaniel going over her story, making sure every detail was straight, every timeline clear. It was exhausting dredging up the memories she'd tried so hard to bury. The shearing, the cold, the terror of those hours in the blizzard. But with each telling, something strange happened. The memories lost their power. They became facts instead of wounds, evidence instead of trauma. You're getting stronger, Consuelo observed one evening. I can see it in how you hold yourself. I don't feel stronger. I feel tired. That's what strength feels like sometimes. Tired but still standing. The night before they were set to leave for Cheyenne, Clara couldn't sleep. She found herself wandering the ranch house in the darkness, eventually ending up in the kitchen where a single lamp still burned. Nathaniel was there sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers. He looked up when she entered, but didn't seem surprised. Couldn't sleep either. Too much thinking. Clara sat across from him. What if it doesn't work? What if the judge believes them instead of us? Then we appeal, we fight, we don't give up. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's just necessary. Nathaniel pushed the papers aside and looked at her directly. Clara, I need to tell you something before tomorrow. Something I should have said before. Her heart quickened. What is it? Whatever happens in that courtroom, whatever the Crawfords say or do, I want you to know that I believe you. Completely. Without reservation. He paused. I've known a lot of people, good ones, bad ones, everything in between. And I can tell when someone's lying. You're not lying. You never were. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Why does that matter so much to me? Your belief. Because you've spent 7 years surrounded by people who made you doubt yourself, who told you that you weren't good enough, weren't worthy enough, weren't anything at all. Nathaniel's voice was gentle but firm. That changes a person, makes them forget who they really are. So I'm telling you now, before we walk into that courtroom, you are good enough. You are worthy. And nothing the Crawfords say tomorrow can change that. Clara couldn't speak. The words had hit something deep inside her, something that had been waiting a long time to be acknowledged. Thank you, she finally managed. Don't thank me for telling the truth. That's just basic decency. He stood gathering his papers. Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He was at the door when she called out. Nathaniel. He turned. Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you. For everything. For finding me. For believing me. For fighting for me when no one else would. Something flickered in his amber eyes. You're welcome, Clara. Now get some rest. The journey to Cheyenne took 2 days. They traveled in a small group, Nathaniel, Clara, Miguel, and 2 of the hands for protection. The roads were still thick with snow, and progress was slow. Clara spent most of the journey in silence, watching the landscape pass, preparing herself for what was coming. She'd never been to Cheyenne, never seen a real courtroom. The prospect was terrifying. But underneath the fear was something else. Anticipation. A hunger for justice that had been building since the moment Henrietta had picked up those shears. They arrived the evening before the hearing and took rooms at a modest hotel. Nathaniel went to meet with the judge's clerk, while Clara tried to eat dinner, though the food tasted like sawdust. The Crawfords are already here, Nathaniel reported when he returned. They've got a lawyer from Denver. Expensive, slick. And we have me, the truth, and every piece of evidence we've collected over the past month. He sat across from her. It's going to be enough, Clara. It has to be. The courtroom was smaller than Clara had imagined, but it felt enormous when she walked in the next morning. Wooden benches filled with spectators, most of them strangers, all of them staring at her. At her short hair. At the woman who'd caused such scandal. The Crawfords sat at a table on the left side of the room. Marcus, Henrietta, and the 4 brothers, all dressed in their Sunday best, looking for all the world like respectable citizens wrongly accused. Their lawyer, a sleek man with a thin mustache, shuffled papers with practiced confidence. Clara took her place beside Nathaniel on the right side. Her hands were shaking, and she clasped them in her lap to hide it. Judge Harrison entered, a stern man in his 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He called the court to order and began reading the charges. Property theft, defamation, assault, conspiracy to commit fraud. The list went on, each item another piece of the nightmare the Crawfords had created. Mr. Crawford, the judge said when he'd finished. How do you plead? Marcus stood, his face a mask of wounded dignity. Not guilty, Your Honor. Every charge is a fabrication invented by this woman to steal what rightfully belongs to our family. And you, Mrs. Whitmore, do you stand by your accusations? Clara rose on legs that threatened to buckle. I do, Your Honor. Every word is true. Very well. Mr. Hartwell, present your case. Nathaniel stood. He wasn't a lawyer, didn't have the polish or the training, but when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Your Honor, 3 months ago, Clara Whitmore was a respectable widow grieving her husband's death. Today she stands before you accused of crimes she didn't commit. Her reputation destroyed, her property, stolen, her very identity, stripped away by the people who should have protected her. He walked toward the center of the room, commanding attention without seeming to try. The Crawfords claim Mrs. Whitmore was unfaithful to her husband. They claim she was involved in an inappropriate relationship with a ranch hand named Jacob Brennan. But Jacob Brennan is here today willing to testify under oath that his only interaction with Mrs. Whitmore consisted of 2 brief conversations about repairing a fence. 2 conversations, in broad daylight, with witnesses present. The Crawfords' lawyer objected, claiming hearsay, but Judge Harrison overruled him. Nathaniel continued laying out the evidence piece by piece. The shearing, the exile, the dead cattle, the poisoned water, the ambush on the Oregon family. Each incident documented, each one pointing to the Crawfords as the perpetrators. The Crawfords claim they were protecting their family's honor, Nathaniel concluded. But what honor is there in attacking a defenseless widow? What honor is there in spreading lies, destroying property, shooting at innocent travelers? The only thing the Crawfords have protected is their own greed. They wanted William Whitmore's property, and they were willing to destroy his widow to get it. The Crawfords' lawyer rose for the defense. He was smooth, Clara had to admit. He painted a picture of a grieving family, devastated by their brother's death, concerned about the strange woman who'd come from nowhere to marry him. Mrs. Whitmore had no family. The lawyer said, his tone dripping with implication. No references, no history anyone could verify. She arrived in this territory as a mail-order bride willing to sell herself to the highest bidder. Is it so unreasonable that a family would have concerns about such a woman? Clara felt Nathaniel tense beside her, but she put a hand on his arm. Let them talk. Let them reveal themselves. And when their beloved brother died, the lawyer continued. Naturally, they were distraught. Perhaps they acted hastily. Perhaps they were too harsh. But can we really blame them for wanting to protect their family from a woman who, by her own admission, failed to produce a single child in 7 years of marriage? The words stung, but Clara kept her face neutral. She'd heard worse. She could survive this. As for the alleged attacks, the lawyer waved a dismissive hand. There's no proof the Crawfords were involved. Anyone could have killed those cattle. Anyone could have cut those fences. Mr. Hartwell is simply looking for someone to blame. When it was time for witnesses, Jacob Brennan went first. He was nervous, his red hair sticking up at odd angles, but his voice was steady as he recounted his conversations with Clara. She asked if I could help repair the fence line, he said. I said I'd be happy to in exchange for some of her preserves. That's all. We talked for maybe 5 minutes total. Never touched her. Never said anything improper. I was just trying to be neighborly. And why should we believe you? The Crawfords' lawyer pressed. You work for Mr. Hartwell now. You have every reason to lie. I work for Mr. Hartwell because the Crawfords ran me out of my last job, Jacob shot back. They spread the same lies about me they're spreading about Mrs. Whitmore. I couldn't find work anywhere in the county until Nathaniel took me on. So yes, I'm grateful to him. But that doesn't make me a liar. Martha Pearson testified next, her voice trembling but determined. She described seeing Clara on the road that terrible day, shorn and bleeding and half frozen. I should have done more, she said, tears streaming down her face. I was a coward. But I saw what they did to her. I saw her head all cut up and bloody. Nobody deserves that. Nobody. The Oregon family testified about the ambush. The rancher from the next valley testified about the Crawfords' long history of intimidation. Even Sarah Miller took the stand, describing Josiah's confession that the family had planned Clara's humiliation for months. He said they were waiting for William to die. Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Said they knew he was sick, and they wanted to be ready. They had the shears picked out before he even drew his last breath. The courtroom gasped. Clara saw Marcus's face go purple with rage, saw Henrietta's mask of innocence slip for just a moment. Finally, it was Clara's turn. She walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The eyes of the courtroom pressed against her curious, judgmental pitying. Mrs. Whitmore, Nathaniel said gently, please tell the court what happened on the morning of December 15th. Clara took a deep breath and began to speak. She told them everything. William's illness, his death, the 3 days of grief before the Crawfords arrived, the accusations, the shearing, the exile into the blizzard with nothing but a carpet bag and the clothes on her back. She didn't cry. She'd cried enough. Instead, she spoke clearly, steadily, letting the facts tell their own story. "And what happened after you left the Crawford property?" Nathaniel asked. "I walked for 3 miles through the blizzard. I found an abandoned cabin near Bone Creek. I nearly died that night." Clara paused. "I would have died if Mr. Hartwell hadn't found me the next morning." "And since then?" "Since then I've been working at Iron Creek Ranch. Honest work for honest wages. I've watched the Crawfords kill Mr. Hartwell's cattle poison, his water cut his fences. I've seen them attack innocent people, just because those people might have been coming to help me." Clara looked directly at the Crawfords for the first time. "I've seen who they really are." The Crawfords' lawyer stood for cross-examination, his smile predatory. "Mrs. Whitmore, you claim to have been faithful to your husband. But isn't it true that your marriage was troubled?" "My marriage was complicated. William's family made sure of that." "Complicated how?" "They never accepted me. From the first day I arrived, they made it clear I wasn't welcome. They criticized everything I did, my cooking, my housekeeping, my appearance. They told William constantly that he'd made a mistake in marrying me." "And how did William respond to this criticism?" Clara hesitated. This was the part she'd dreaded. He tried to defend me at first, but over time the pressure wore him down. By the end, he barely spoke to me at all." "So your husband had withdrawn from you. He was unhappy in the marriage." "He was dying," Clara said sharply. "He had pneumonia. He could barely breathe, let alone have conversations about our marriage." "But before the illness, would you say your husband was satisfied with his choice of wife?" Clara felt the trap closing around her. If she said yes, they'd call her a liar. If she said no, they'd use it against her. "I believe William loved me," she said carefully. "I believe he regretted that his family made our life so difficult. And I believe that if he could see what they've done to me since his death, he would be ashamed of them. That's speculation, not fact. No, it's truth." Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is the last entry from William's journal. The Crawfords told me I couldn't take it, but I copied the words before I left. I've carried them with me ever since." The Crawfords' lawyer objected, but Judge Harrison overruled him. "Let her read it." Clara unfolded the paper, her hands steady now. "C tends to me without complaint," she read. "I chose well, despite what family says. If something happens to me, I pray she finds happiness. She deserves better than the life I've given her." Silence filled the courtroom. "William wrote those words 3 days before he died," Clara continued. "He knew his family hated me. He knew they would try to destroy me. And his last wish was that I find happiness." She looked at the judge. "I'm not asking for revenge, Your Honor. I'm asking for justice. I'm asking for the chance to rebuild my life without the Crawfords trying to tear it down." The closing arguments were brief. The Crawfords' lawyer made one last attempt to paint Clara as a schemer, a manipulator, a woman who'd somehow orchestrated her own persecution. But his words fell flat against the weight of evidence. Nathaniel's closing was simple. "Your Honor, you've heard the testimony. You've seen the evidence. Clara Whitmore is not a criminal. She's a victim, and the people who victimized her are sitting right there." He pointed at the Crawfords. "I ask you to hold them accountable, not for revenge, but for justice, so that the next widow, the next orphan, the next vulnerable person in this territory knows that the law will protect them." Judge Harrison retired to consider his verdict. The wait was agony, 2 hours that felt like 2 years. Clara sat rigid in her seat, afraid to hope, afraid to breathe. When the judge returned, his face was grave. "I have reviewed the evidence presented by both parties," he said, "and I have reached my decision." Clara's heart stopped. The property known as the Whitmore Ranch, including the house outbuildings and all contents, is hereby restored to Clara Whitmore as the legal widow and heir of William Whitmore. The Crawfords' claim to the property is denied." A murmur ran through the courtroom. "Furthermore, I find substantial evidence that Marcus Crawford, Henrietta Crawford, Silas Crawford, Solomon Crawford, Ezra Crawford, and Josiah Crawford engaged in a pattern of harassment, defamation, and criminal assault against Mrs. Whitmore. Marcus Crawford is sentenced to 8 years in the Territorial Prison. Henrietta Crawford 5 years. The remaining brothers 3 years each." Clara couldn't breathe. She heard the words, understood them intellectually, but they didn't seem real. "Finally," the judge continued, "I am ordering the Crawfords to pay restitution to Mrs. Whitmore in the amount of $5,000 for damages to her reputation and livelihood, and an additional $2,000 to Mr. Hartwell for the destruction of his property." Marcus Crawford shot to his feet. "This is an outrage. You can't—" "I can, and I have." Judge Harrison's voice was cold. "You had your chance to present your case, Mr. Crawford. You chose to lie under oath instead. Now you'll face the consequences." He banged his gavel. "Court is adjourned. Deputies take the prisoners into custody." The chaos that followed was a blur. The Crawford brothers shouting Henrietta, screaming deputies moving in with handcuffs. Clara sat frozen in her seat, unable to process what had just happened. Then Nathaniel's hand was on her shoulder. "It's over," he said quietly. "You won." Clara looked up at him, and something broke loose inside her. The tears she'd held back for so long finally came, not tears of grief or fear, but tears of relief, so profound they felt like drowning. "I won," she whispered. "You won." She stood on shaking legs and did something she'd never dared do before. She wrapped her arms around Nathaniel Hartwell and held on like he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. And he held her back steady and strong, just as he'd been from the very beginning. The journey back to Iron Creek Ranch felt different from the journey out. The same snow-covered roads, the same bitter cold, but something had shifted in the air itself. Clara sat in the wagon beside Nathaniel, wrapped in blankets against the wind, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel hunted. "You're quiet," Nathaniel observed as they crested a hill. "I'm thinking. About what happens now." Clara pulled the blanket tighter. "The Crawfords are in prison. I have my property back. The lies have been exposed." She paused. "I don't know what to do with a future I never expected to have." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" It was such a simple question, such an impossible question. For 7 years, Clara's wants had been irrelevant. She'd wanted William's family to accept her, they never did. She'd wanted children, her body refused. She'd wanted peace, and instead she'd gotten shears and snow and shame. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've spent so long just trying to survive that I forgot how to dream." "Then maybe it's time to remember." They arrived at the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. Consuelo met them at the door, her face alight with joy. "I heard," she said, pulling Clara into a fierce embrace. "The whole county's heard. Justice finally. Gracias a Dios." "It doesn't feel real yet," Clara confessed. "It will. Give it time." That night the ranch celebrated. The hands built a bonfire in the yard, and someone produced a fiddle. There was dancing and laughter and more food than Clara had seen in months. She stood at the edge of the celebration, watching, still not quite believing she was allowed to be happy. "You should dance," Nathaniel said, appearing beside her. "I don't know how." "Neither do half the men out there. Hasn't stopped them." Clara smiled despite herself. "Maybe later." "I'll hold you to that." He rejoined the celebration, and Clara watched him go. Watched the way he moved among his people, clapping shoulders, sharing jokes, completely at ease, in a way she'd never learned to be. "He cares for you." Clara turned to find Consuelo beside her, 2 cups of warm cider in her hands. "He cares for everyone," Clara said, accepting a cup. "Not like this." Consuelo's dark eyes were knowing. I've been with him 15 years. I've seen him help dozens of people take in strays fight battles that weren't his to fight. But I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Clara stuttered. He's just being kind. Men don't ride through blizzards for kindness, mija. They don't defy powerful families and spend months building legal cases for kindness. Consuelo took a sip of her cider. He loves you. The question is whether you're brave enough to let him. Clara didn't answer. Couldn't answer. The word love felt too big, too dangerous, too much like a dream that would shatter if she examined it too closely. But that night, lying in her bed at Iron Creek Ranch, she let herself imagine a life here, a future here, with Nathaniel. The thought terrified her, and thrilled her, and kept her awake until dawn. The weeks that followed brought changes Clara hadn't anticipated. With the Crawfords gone, the county seemed to exhale. People who'd been afraid to associate with her suddenly appeared at the ranch with invitations and apologies. Martha Pearson came first, bringing a basket of preserves and a formal invitation to join the ladies' quilting circle. I know I wasn't brave when it mattered, Martha said, her eyes downcast, but I'd like to make amends if you'll let me. Clara accepted the invitation, not because she particularly wanted to quilt, but because isolation had been her enemy for too long. It was time to build connections, even imperfect ones. The quilting circle led to church suppers, which led to community gatherings, which led to something Clara had never had before: friends. Women her own age who'd heard her story and chose to believe her. Older women who clucked over her short hair and brought her tonics they swore would make it grow faster. Even a few men who touched their hats and nodded respectfully when she passed. You're becoming quite the celebrity, Nathaniel observed one evening, watching her sort through a stack of invitations. It's strange. 3 months ago, these same people wouldn't look me in the eye. People are complicated. They know right from wrong, but fear makes them forget. Now that the Crawfords are gone, they're remembering. Does it bother you that they only came around after it was safe? Nathaniel considered. Some. But I've learned that bitterness is a poison you drink hoping someone else will die. Better to accept the allies we have than to push them away for not being perfect. Clara set down the invitations and looked at him. Really looked at him the way she'd been afraid to since that night at the courthouse. You're a good man, Nathaniel Hartwell. I try to be. No, I mean it. I've known a lot of men in my life. William was decent, but weak. The Crawfords were monsters pretending to be human. The men at the orphanage, the men on the wagon train, the men in town, they were all just men. Looking out for themselves. But you're different. Different how? You look out for everyone else first. You put yourself in danger for people who can't repay you. You fight battles that aren't yours to fight. Clara shook her head. I didn't know men like you existed. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I'm not as noble as you think. I have selfish motives too. Like what? Like wanting you to stay. The words hung in the air between them. Clara felt her breath catch. Nathaniel, I know it's too soon. I know you're still healing. I know you need time. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his amber eyes. But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. Clara's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure he could hear it. What if I'm never ready? What if William's death and everything after broke something in me that can't be fixed? Then I'll still be here. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and rough. Not because I expect anything in return, but because this is where you belong. This ranch, this community, this family we've built, it's yours now, whether you want me or not. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I don't deserve this. You deserve more than you know. Nathaniel squeezed her hand, then released it. But I've said enough for now. Just think about it. That's all I ask. He left her standing there, holding an armful of invitations, her mind spinning with possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider. Spring came slowly to Wyoming, the snow retreating inch by inch, revealing the brown earth beneath. Clara's hair grew longer, falling past her ears now, the auburn shot through with silver that caught the light. She'd stopped trying to hide it. The silver, she'd decided, was a badge of honor, a reminder of what she'd survived. The letter from the territorial prison arrived on a March morning. Clara recognized the cramped handwriting immediately. Josiah Crawford, the youngest brother. She almost threw it in the fire unread. But something made her hesitate. "What is it?" Consuelo asked, seeing her expression. "A letter from Josiah Crawford." Consuelo's face hardened. "Burn it." "I should." Clara turned the envelope over in her hands. "But I want to know what he has to say." She opened it carefully, as if the paper itself might bite. The letter was short, the handwriting shaky. "Mrs. Whitmore, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not because I got caught, but because what we did was wrong. I knew it was wrong at the time, but I was too weak to stop it. Sarah was right about me. I'm a coward. I did what my brothers told me to do because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. I think about that day a lot. The day Henrietta cut your hair. I remember how you didn't scream, didn't beg. Just looked at us with those eyes that said you knew exactly who we were and what we were doing. I've never been more ashamed of anything in my life. You probably won't believe this, but I hope you find happiness. Real happiness, the kind my family never would have let you have. You deserve it more than any of us ever deserved our name. Josiah Crawford." Clara read the letter twice. Then she set it down and stared at the wall. "What does it say?" Consuelo asked. "He apologized." "Do you believe him?" Clara thought about it. About Josiah's nervous hesitation that day, the way he wouldn't meet her eyes. About Sarah's words. "He's not like the others. There's good in him, but he's too weak to stand up." "I believe he feels guilty," she said finally. "Whether that's the same as being sorry, I don't know." "What will you do?" Clara picked up the letter and walked to the fire. She held it over the flames for a long moment, watching the heat curl the edges. Then she pulled it back. "I'll keep it," she said. "Not to forgive him, not yet, but to remember that even the people who hurt us are human, that they have choices even when they make the wrong ones." Consuelo nodded slowly. "You've grown, mija. I've had help." The decision came to her on a quiet April evening, as unexpected as a spring thunderstorm. She was sitting on the porch watching the sun set, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, when Nathaniel joined her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, something they'd gotten good at over the past months. "I went to the Whitmore place today," Clara said suddenly. Nathaniel turned to look at her. "You did? First time since everything." She took a sip of tea. "I thought it would feel like coming home. It didn't." "What did it feel like?" "Like visiting a grave." Clara set down her cup. "William is buried there. Our whole life together is there. The house we shared, the dreams we had, the disappointments we pretended not to notice. But I'm not there anymore. I left that person behind in the snow." "Is that a bad thing?" "No. It's just strange. I spent 7 years trying to make that place a home, trying to make that life work. And now I realize I was trying to force something that was never meant to be." Nathaniel was quiet, waiting. "I've decided to sell it," Clara continued. "The Whitmore place. I don't want to live there. I don't want to go back to being that person." "What do you want?" Clara turned to face him. The setting sun caught his eyes, turning them to molten gold. "I want to stay here," she said. "At Iron Creek Ranch. With you. With Consuelo and Miguel, and all the people who've become my family." Nathaniel's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. As a housekeeper? No. Clara took a deep breath. As your partner, your equal, and if you'll have me, as your wife. The silence that followed was the longest of Clara's life. Then Nathaniel smiled a real smile, the kind that transformed his weathered face into something young and hopeful. I was going to ask you, he said. I had a whole speech prepared, something about second chances and new beginnings. I stole your thunder. You did. He reached out and took her hand. Clara Whitmore, are you sure I'm a widower with too much land and not enough time? I'm stubborn and difficult, and I work too hard. I'm probably the worst possible choice for... Clara leaned forward and kissed him. It was a brief kiss, gentle, almost shy, but it silenced his protests more effectively than any words could have. I'm sure, she said when they parted. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Nathaniel cupped her face in his rough hands, his thumbs tracing the lines of her cheekbones. Then yes, he said. 1,000 times yes. They were married in June when the wildflowers bloomed across the Wyoming hills, and the days stretched long and golden. The ceremony was small, just the ranch family, a few friends from town, and Judge Harrison, who'd made the trip from Cheyenne to perform the ceremony himself. It's not often I get to see a happy ending, the judge said afterward. Most of my work involves putting bad people in prison. It's nice to see good people find each other. Clara wore a dress of pale blue, the color Nathaniel said brought out her eyes, and her hair, though still short, was long enough to pin up properly. She'd considered covering the silver strands, but decided against it. They're part of my story, she told Consuelo when asked. Why would I hide them? The wedding celebration lasted until well past midnight. There was dancing Clara finally learned with Nathaniel as her patient teacher, and singing and more food than anyone could eat. The ranch hands toasted the couple with increasingly elaborate speeches, and even Miguel, normally so reserved, wiped tears from his eyes when Nathaniel kissed his bride. That night in the room that was now theirs, Nathaniel held Clara close and whispered, "Thank you." For what? For surviving. For being brave enough to let me help. For choosing to stay. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. For giving me a reason to believe in second chances. Clara smiled against his chest. Thank you for finding me. I would have ridden through 100 blizzards. I know. That's why I love you. The years that followed were not without challenges. The ranch demanded constant work, and Wyoming winters remained brutal. There were setbacks and disappointments, moments when the weight of the past pressed heavy and the future seemed uncertain. But there were also moments of pure joy. The birth of their daughter Sarah, named for Nathaniel's first wife, with Clara's blessing. The expansion of the ranch made possible by the restitution money from the Crawfords. The founding of a school for the children of ranch families with Clara as its first teacher. And there were the people who found their way to Iron Creek just as Clara had. Women escaping violent husbands. Families fleeing persecution. Orphans with nowhere else to go. The ranch became known throughout the territory as a place of refuge, a last hope for those who had none. You're building something remarkable, Judge Harrison told Clara during one of his visits. This place, it's more than a ranch. It's a sanctuary. It's what Nathaniel's wife asked him to create, Clara replied. I'm just helping. You're doing more than helping, you're leading. Clara thought about that later, watching the sunset from her porch. Leading. Was that what she was doing? She'd never thought of herself as a leader. She'd spent most of her life following the rules of the orphanage, following the expectations of her husband and his family, following the path of least resistance. But somewhere along the way, that had changed. She'd stopped following and started choosing to survive, choosing to fight, choosing to build something worth having. The woman who had crawled into that frozen shack, shorn and broken, was not the woman who sat here now. That woman had thought her life was over. This woman knew it was just beginning. On the 5th anniversary of her arrival at Iron Creek, Nathaniel found Clara standing by the window of their bedroom, looking out at the land they'd built together. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Henrietta Crawford." He tensed. "Why?" "She was released from prison last month. Did you know?" "I heard." "She sent me a letter. Asked to meet." Nathaniel turned her to face him. "Clara, you don't have to." "I know, but I want to." Clara met his eyes. "Not for her sake. For mine. I want to see who I've become by seeing who she still is." The meeting took place in the parlor of a modest boarding house in Cheyenne. Henrietta Crawford looked older than her years, prison having stolen whatever beauty she'd once possessed. But her eyes were the same sharp, calculating, searching for weakness. "You look well," Henrietta said, her voice carrying an edge. "I am well." "I heard you married Hartwell. Built quite the empire out there." "We've done well." Henrietta's lip curled. "Must be nice, landing on your feet after everything." Clara studied the woman who had caused her so much pain. The hands that had wielded the shears. The mouth that had spoken such cruel words. 5 years ago, this woman had held absolute power over Clara's fate. Now she was just small, bitter, and broken, and utterly without power. "Why did you want to see me?" Clara asked. "I thought—" Henrietta hesitated. "I thought you might help me. Put in a word with some of your fancy friends. Help me get back on my feet." Clara almost laughed. Almost. "You thought I would help you. You helped Josiah. He told me. Said you wrote back to him, said you forgave him. I said I was working toward forgiveness. That's different. But you helped him find work when he got out. You gave him a chance. Josiah showed remorse. Real remorse." Clara leaned forward. "Have you ever been sorry, Henrietta? Not sorry you got caught. Not sorry things didn't work out. Sorry for what you did to me." Henrietta's face hardened. "You took everything from us." "I took nothing. You destroyed yourselves with your own hatred." Clara stood. "I came here hoping to find some sign that you'd changed. Some indication that the years in prison had taught you something. But you're exactly the same person who held those shears 5 years ago. And you're still the same worthless—" "No." Clara's voice was quiet but firm. "I'm not. That's the difference between us. I grew. I learned. I became someone better than the scared, broken woman you tried to destroy." She walked to the door. "Goodbye, Henrietta. I hope you find peace someday, but I won't be the one to give it to you." She left without looking back. That evening, sitting on the porch of Iron Creek Ranch with Nathaniel beside her, Clara felt something settle in her chest. A final closing of a door she hadn't realized was still open. "How do you feel?" Nathaniel asked. "Free," Clara said. "For the first time truly free." He took her hand. "You always were, you know. Even when they tried to take everything. They couldn't touch what made you who you are." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder and watched the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. She thought about the woman she'd been, the orphan, the mail-order bride, the wife who was never quite good enough. She thought about the shearing, the blizzard, the shack where she'd nearly died. She thought about Nathaniel's face appearing in the doorway, about 4 words that had changed everything. "You're coming with me." He hadn't just been offering her rescue. He'd been offering her a future, a chance to become someone she'd never imagined she could be. And she'd taken it. Despite the fear, despite the doubt, despite every voice in her head telling her she didn't deserve it. She'd taken it, and she'd made it hers. Clara Abigail Hartwell watched the stars wheel overhead and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not because a man had saved her, not because justice had been served, not because the Crawfords had been punished, but because she had chosen this life, fought for it, earned it through every tear and every terror and every moment of refusing to give up. The woman they had tried to destroy was gone. In her place stood something far stronger, a survivor, a leader, a builder of sanctuaries, a woman who had walked through fire and emerged not diminished, but forged. And as the night settled soft and peaceful over the Wyoming hills, Clara Hartwell smiled. She had come through the storm. She had found her home. And nothing, cruelty, not shame, not all the hatred in the world would ever take that from her again.